So welcome, Chris.
Good morning.
You're welcome. First item is a really exciting item. This morning I was listening to one of the local radio stations, 104.1 The Fish, and it's a Christian station, and they went out of their way to thank TriMet's operators for their awesome bus service and just being thankful for the service we provide. So I thought that would be a thing to just wanted to let you guys know about that.
Thank you.
And then secondly, it's been a few weeks, but we've all seen the earthquake stuff going on in California, and I just got to thinking, if something like that hit in any of our commute hours or something, would be in for a disaster, and I think it would be worth at your retreat dedicating a part of it, that time, to figuring out how we want to do disaster services, what the expectations are for all the systems, and especially for those who are really in need, who use Lyft and cabs and stuff, because, I haven't heard a lot about many things disaster related with TriMet, so just thought you guys might want to know that.
It's a good comment. Maybe you can address that for it. But there's a lot of discussion now about seismic resiliency in the system out there. So we concur with you. And there's a lot of folks trying to make sure we have crossings over the Willamette River that would allow not only cars and trucks, but also allow for transit, because we believe would probably be a major portion of the relief for the recovery of the area in the event of a major seismic event. So good topic. We'll talk with the general manager about maybe seeing where we are in that, because it's good to be apprised of that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So that concludes the public forum. I think this is actually the first for us to only have one
I
person.
believe it is.
So with that, I'm actually going to call then, and close the public forum and move on to declare the meeting, our business meeting for Wednesday, August 14, 2019, to order. And the first items on the agenda are the board reports. And the first item on there is the Finance and Audit Committee. Director Stovall.
Good morning, audience and board. We held I like it this morning. I don't know what it is, but my voice sounds so much deeper. Super cool. My mother would be proud. So we covered three items in the Finance and Audit Committee this morning. The initial item was the financial statements, which are the unaudited financial statements, which we'll be getting the audit actually relatively soon. But we covered kind of the overall financial performance for for this previous fiscal year. And the primary thing that was highlighted was the overall reduction in our passenger fare revenue. And they're doing the finance team, D. Brookshire and team is doing some initial review in regards to kind of what has led to that, and they've got some initial findings, but we'll be looking at some additional items in regards to the 5% reduction in overall passenger fare revenue. The second item was the Southwest Corridor update, and we continuously are getting updates on that because of the large financial commitment required to make that successful. And we talked about a few items, potentially looking at some scope reductions to ensure that we can come in with a designed budget and either meet it or come under that designed budget as we move to execute on exactly what the steering committee has moved forward for the solution getting to the Southwest Corridor. So we'll be continuously, as a Finance and Audit Committee, looking at that and have the additional board updates as we continue to move along. We got a HB 2017 update, and we continue to see positive things happen there as far as the overall revenues. We are bound by a plan that we actually had. We moved forward for approval, but the HB 2017 funds are coming through, and we are seeing a bit more funds than what was originally forecasted. But again, because of the 3-year plan that we put in place, those funds may not be able to be used in this current plan period, but we'll have to wait and see depending on what the future revenues look like. But we did get an update on the HB 2017. Are there any questions from the rest of the board members and the two board members who are part of that committee. I don't know if
I
I
have
missed
nothing to
something
add.
or
I have nothing to add.
something to
Good
add.
job. Good job, yes.
Yeah, just a quick question then. So I understand there was a reviewed fare reduction or reduction in fare recovery, and you guys were looking into it. I didn't know exactly what that meant. Is that a finance and audit committee investigation, or is the agency looking into what's behind that?
Yeah, so it is actually the finance team that's taking a deeper look at that. Some initial items were the Hop Fast Pass implementation. The Hop Fast Pass, actually, there's fare capping that's associated with that. And so some of the fare capping, now that we've taken the projections and we moved to actual, so we're now starting to see, how those projections are aligning with what we projected in regards to what's actually happening. And fare capping, again, allows riders to cap their fares on a daily, monthly basis, annual basis. Once they hit the amount of a daily, monthly, or annual pass, then they don't actually get charged additional funds at that point in time. So initially, that was about $1 million budgeted forecast drop for passenger fare revenues. We're also seeing fare evasion, as we've talked about at the board meeting. Fare evasion has gone up, and so that's a concern, and we've actually started doing some things. And here at the board level, we've approved certain things to be able to move forward in addressing the fare evasion. So that has a pretty big, significant impact on passenger fare revenues. And then the low-income fare. Again, we're seeing a bit better adoption than what was forecasted. We went off of the Orca Pass out of Seattle to see what their deployment was and their engagement was, and we're actually seeing something ahead of those projections. So we're seeing those primary things in regards to the passenger fare reduction. So that's kind of what we're seeing. I actually requested a couple more items in regards to how we've got projections on one side of the equation, but we also have budget on the other side of the equation. And so how does that compare in regards to what we projected to what the budget is in comparison to what the actual outside of it? And so that's the additional research they're going to do and come back to the Finance and Audit Committee for a brief report in the future.
Fantastic, thorough response. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
You made his day.
I know, that's why I'm super smiling. I'm like,
so much right now. No, thank you.
question. Any other questions for Director Stovall?
they all won't be the verbose like that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, I'm going to move on then to the next board report, which is my report. And this is actually my pleasure to bring before the board for your consideration, discussion, and hopefully action is the performance review of our general manager, Doug Kelsey. For the new board members, and for anybody watching this, one of our roles obviously is to hire the general manager, and our job is to also monitor the organization and the performance of the general manager. And we do evaluate his performance on a regular basis, usually annually. And as the president, I take the responsibility for drafting a review based upon the board's agreed upon performance objectives. And so what we do is we set those objectives, and then this is the major benchmark for review of the general manager performance is based on that. And that'll be also something I'll be coming back to the board later on so that we can have a further discussion about what are the priorities for next year. I did draft that review. I sent it out to the full board, and I want to thank those who got back to me with your comments and suggestions. And I point out that all of those changes and suggestions have been incorporated into the draft that you have in your packets today. And so again, this draft is here now for your consideration. And also again for the new members, after we take action on the review and my recommended salary adjustments, we will again start work on that performance metrics for next year, and I'll bring that back to the board for consideration as we get that done. So just a little bit of history for anybody watching. When Doug was first appointed as the general manager of March 2018, the board did provide him with written performance objectives, and a lot of it was based on some of the things we heard during the recruitment process. And it was for the period between March 2018 and the end of this fiscal year, which was June 30, 2019. And the measures and outcomes were also provided to the board and are really, as I said, the basis for the review. In the draft that you have in your packets, I attempted to summarize Doug's performance in that memo. And I could go through this review with the board in some detail if you desire. However, based on my discussions and feedback I've been getting, I believe that it's probably the opinion of this board that Doug has met and usually exceeded our expectations as general manager. And I want to thank you for the efforts you've put out over the last year. Doug has completed or made significant progress in all of our identified priority areas. And I've also, however, noted some of the areas that we want to continue to be a priority for the board in the upcoming fiscal year, which will also then be a part of the performance metrics for next year. So with that, and again, I'm willing to go through the evaluation in detail, but I guess I would open it up for the board, since you've seen the review, to see if you have any questions of me or if you'd like to make comments about the general manager's performance. And I think this is probably appropriate that everybody have an opportunity. So maybe I'll start on our far right with Director Gonzalez and see if you have any questions for me or comments you would like to make. You're one of the newer ones, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot. You're just on the right side.
Doing a great job of it.
I'm putting you on the spot?
Yes. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Director Warner. And I appreciate the opportunity to acknowledge both in how impressed I have become at your work, and I really appreciate that you've stuck to delivering on the objectives and the metrics, but I would say have stepped forward into the soft areas we didn't really put into this document to really help us start to craft a vision for the agency that looks forward, that looks comprehensively, and I think that continues the trajectory of putting the agency in a very good place within the context of public transportation systems worldwide. And I really appreciate that you've brought a perspective that reconciles the public service aspects with the agility of adapting to a changing marketplace at the same time. I think that's really key in today's environment, at a time when public agencies are essentially competing with the private sector and the sharing economy for public services. Really leaning into that relationship and being a convener and a coordinator is the piece that didn't exactly show up here in the metrics in the document, but in some fashion or another, whether it was through the community forums or through previous experience that you brought before the position here, clearly you've brought that attitude and that tenor to the agency, and I certainly appreciate it. I would like to extend the gratitude of my district as well in helping us in looking through this, navigating through these big pieces of change, and that's a just long way of saying I'm very impressed. Thank you very much, Doug.
Dr. Bellin?
Yes, I first want to thank Bruce for preparing the performance evaluation. Very much appreciated, and I wholeheartedly agree with the very excellent evaluation of Doug's performance, and I don't think I can add to what's there, but we're very grateful for your hard work. Thank you, Doug.
Ditto. I've oftentimes referred to you as the right person at the right time for the agency, given all the change that we're going through. And I oftentimes wonder how you even sleep at night, given all that you accomplished in the last 18 months and then all that is going on within the agency right now. I think your background in both the private industry as well as the transit industry is just so essential right now in terms of some of the things around transit-oriented development that we're doing, and just in terms of, I think, the relationship building you're doing with all of the different elected officials and the whole individuals within our region, and building that relationship and strengthening it, as well as with the governor's staff, is just so impressive. And we will, as an agency, be able to receive the support better by people understanding the direction of where we're going. But I'm just so grateful for your efforts and enjoy working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, I second everything that's already been said, and we'll just add quickly that ultimately, I've been on the board for almost 8 years now, and I've been a part of an agency and organization that has just continued to rise. I think that started with Neil's leadership, and then Doug, you have just extended, I think, the excellence that people have come to know TriMet. I mean, we continue to do a lot of great things on the financial side of things, but as we referenced just recently, we're one of the highest government agencies as far as public opinion, in the state of Oregon. I think that continues to be, I think, a hallmark of your leadership and the team that you've created, because as we all know, none of us are any good without a great team. And I think you've assembled a great team of people. You see in people exactly the potential that they have, and then you're able to leverage that incredible contribution that they bring to the table. And that's what's impressed me the most, to continue to really move forward and execute on the plans that have been laid out. Again, as you've already heard me say, I'm very impressed with your leadership. I'm very impressed with the team that we have. And to that end, I'm also impressed with the board members I get to sit next to once a month. And, I wish we could do it more.
Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate your leadership as well, Doug, and especially the fact that you've either met or exceeded all these goals and objectives. I really appreciate that, and it's taken a lot of hard work to make that happen, and collaboration as well. So I ditto all the previous remarks.
Okay. I also appreciate you, Doug, for your leadership, and it's been great as a new oncoming board member to see you at so many different community meetings. I know that there was one that was held in Milwaukee, and you were there, and there was DOT activities around service enhancements, and you think you were fully engaged to in that process, meeting with folks one-on-one. So I'm just very impressed by your humility and your willingness to, step out of your role sometimes and to really, I think, listen to folks from all walks of life. So thank you for that. And I think, moving forward, I think you have also done an excellent job of continuing to make sure that as an agency we are accountable to many different stakeholders, including marginalized communities. I know that that has been a particular interest of mine coming on the board, and I think so far you have been very open and your team have been very responsive to the needs of those communities and forming new partnerships. And so thank you again for your leadership on that.
So Doug, I can't add a lot more. I think you read my evaluation, and we talked about it. We did give you a lot of expectations, and I'm sure during the first few months on the job you did not sleep a lot, because I know you were out a lot with the communities, with the staff, with the stakeholders and riders, learning how the organization could better itself. And I think you've done just a marvelous job, as was pointed out. And I do appreciate your management and leadership, and I appreciate your steady hand at the helm here. And we're just glad to have you here. So before we take action on this, is there anything you would like to say this morning to the board?
Well, firstly, I'm very humbled by the comments today. I think, as one of the comments made, is I'm very blessed to have some very talented people I get to work with, and you don't get anything done without great people, and they're carrying a lot of a big load these days, not only at the executive director level, at the director level, and yes, the agency does need to go through transformation and change externally to be ready for this $1.6 billion agency that we are in budget size, and that's not easy as you grow as well as reform, and it really is a real tribute to that team. So that's where the credit really deserves, not me. So thank you.
Thank you. And you don't have to be so humble, because I think you've got a lot of new folks on the team, and I want to acknowledge Doug's work to improve the diversity of the workforce, especially at the highest possible levels in the organization. You've made amazing changes in that people who don't know the organization can see or understand, but it's greatly appreciated by the board and by the community. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So based on what I'm hearing, I would like to proceed to take formal action to approve the general manager's review and my recommended wage increase for the general manager. Specifically with the positive job performance and with your comments that you just made, I'd like us to consider a resolution which would, number one, accept the performance evaluation of the general manager, and number two, grant a 5% wage increase retroactive to July 1, 2019, which was, again, the end of last fiscal year and the beginning of this fiscal year. So we don't have an actual resolution made up for you, but I'd like to ask that you have a resolution. If those components are okay, I'd like to, again, propose that resolution be made. Staff will put together a resolution with those two items. And if that's acceptable to you, I'd like to have a motion to add a resolution to our
So
agenda.
moved.
I have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Okay, that was quick. I get it's been moved and seconded. First off, is there any further discussion on the motion for approving this resolution? Hearing none, then I'll have a vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to approve, again, I'll say it, the performance evaluation of the general manager and to grant a 5% wage increase retroactive to July 1, 2019, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried unanimously. I want to thank you again, Doug. I want to thank the board for your time and effort on this evaluation. And in the next few weeks, Doug and I will be working up a little bit more on the performance metrics for the next year, and I'll get that off to the board, and we'll have some further input from you, and then we'll take action or just concur that that's what we'll gauge your performance on. And I should point out that Doug has already provided me his first shot of the things that he thinks we should be working on the next year's priorities. And I have, with my discussions, heard from you, many of the board members, but we will engage you some more. So thank you very much for that. All right. So that concludes the board reports, unless somebody else has a board report for this morning. All right. Then let's move on to the general manager reports. And the first item is the ridership report.
Correct. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President, members of the board. So 3 items to cover with you this morning. Firstly, the report for July. Second, I'd like to give you a quick update on an announcement recently that some of you may be aware from the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration. And also thirdly, just to put a reminder out, a bit of a self-promoting for TriMet around a recent government survey that was done around the results of how TriMet is actually seen within this region, particularly as compared to other agencies. First, let's get started with the ridership report. For July, TriMet provided 8.1 million rides, in July. The weekly total ridership was basically flat year over year, but we did see some fluctuations in the types of services. The buses provided more than 1 million weekly trips. Now that's a year-to-year improvement of over 1.8%. And it's also, what's I think interesting here, is the 4th straight month of increasing bus ridership. So as we all know, when we started the HB 2017 work and plus the payroll tax work, you've got to put the service out before people start getting aware of it and making changes to what works for them. So I think the 4-month to me is more encouraging on top of the 1-month results. So in terms of another positive note, the weekend ridership jumped more than 3% over July. I think the use of the frequent bus service was also up 5%. Frequent bus service to me is one of the real secret sauces this region needs to help get at with our partners at City of Portland and others around enhanced transit corridors. And you see examples of that most recently in the news where you see dedicated bus right-of-ways. And I think that is an exciting part of our future. Max dipped a little bit, down 2.5% system-wide and 1.5% on the orange line. West is continued to be the struggling part of our portfolio, and again, that was down 10.4%. The decline, I think, correlates this one again to the employment changes in the corridor. We have a long-term, basically no-cut contract here, and we're doing everything we can to manage it, but including the cost side, but not crossing that safety line. That's really, really crucial. So the people who use it love it, but it is still, we have some structural ridership issues on this small feeder line. So happy to answer any questions on the ridership. If not, I'll move into the announcement around the FTA.
Let's check. Questions on the ridership? Thank you. I
Okay.
consider that positive. In
Yeah,
many
that's
ways.
it's good. It's
Thank
good
you
news,
very much.
particularly when many other agencies are still really tracking down, including double digits around the region, nation.
You indicated that West's ridership was down, you said 10?
10.4%.
I'm just looking at some written material that we have, and it says 8.6%?
Should be, the one I've got is 10.4. I'll cross-check that with you. Either way, it's a problem.
Oh, you're reporting on July.
July,
I'm looking
July
at
only.
June.
Not the prior month, it'll be
Okay.
July.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So yeah, and very pleased to inform the board, the FTA has granted TriMet another low-no grant to expand the electric bus fleet. This is excellent news for us. This is the third such grant we've received just in the last 3 years. So a real thanks to our senators and Congress leadership for making sure TriMet is at the forefront here, is receiving some of the benefits of these grants. So in this case, $2.1 million will allow for the purchase of 3 more additional zero-emission battery electric buses for us, bringing our size of the fleet to 13 vehicles. Again, we've got to procure them, get them in place and such, so that will take a bit of time, but this is very good news. And I do want to remind the board that part of when we made the decision, the board made the decision last fall, that as we scale the number of fleet up, we want to make sure we learn here to make, I had committed to the board that in approximately a 4-year period, we are going to come back and say, how is the performance doing? Is the battery, are the specifications right? Are we getting the right charging distances that we need? Is the maintenance right, et cetera? May bring that back sooner, depending if we accelerate the numbers up, and depending on where the technology of the bus manufacturers are. So I'll use 4 years as that proxy, but just to remind particularly some of the newer board members that really want to do a post check-in before we start putting the volume at this and really accelerating this up. Because we want to make hydrogen also should not be underestimated as well. Right now it's very costly, but there's some really interesting things going on in the hydrogen bus side of things, not only in this country but globally. So, so stay tuned, that will come. But just wanted you to be aware that we're ahead of schedule, if you will. And I also want to comment that we're also going to be having discussions with piloting an electric rebuild articulated bus. So those discussions even with our management team yesterday. Instead of buying just new, we're remanufactured electric buses at the 40-foot level, maybe 30-foot level are done. But we want to be one of the partners to actually look at implementing an electrified remanufactured bus, which I believe will maybe help us actually get to a division transit type of mindset of that when it opens, that marketplace is there for us. So we're working with the partners on this one. So this is a new first for us. We'll see where it goes. So there'll be lessons learned to come. Again, the technology is emerging. We're also evaluating the cost, the reliability, and again, part of the commitment is to get to the 100%. And this did come up in the Finance and Audit Committee by Director Simmons. We will come back to the board with a performance update on how the fleet is doing, the speed of rolling that out. So it was a great comment at the Finance and Audit Committee. So thank you. In this case, the $2.1 million grant will be issued to Proterra. And this will be actually just in time with the other ones coming, as Portland has been awarded and are going to be hosting the electric vehicle, the Global Electric Vehicle Conference here in June of 2020, so next year. So the timing on this is excellent, and we're working with our partners to see, make sure that TriMet is first and front as part of these grants to take advantage of this conference to catalyze these types of things as much as possible. So. Again, the 4 electric buses, just to remind everybody, on line 62, that's the Murray Boulevard, Washington County. The 5th is on site now at our Merlot operating facility in Beaverton. So we are moving, and this just adds on to the expansion. So very, very good news. The third item I had of three is, I guess the ultimate is no greater compliment than the work you are all doing in your leadership to be recognized by the community, not by what we think, but by what others think. So a recent survey found that Metro leads the region in favorability for all key government entities. We ranked TriMet, ODOT, city and the county governments, the federal government, and Metro itself. In that survey, TriMet came out on top with a 73% total favorability rating. So thanks to your leadership, and I'd say all of the staff's work on a daily basis, and to the compliments from the operators that you hear on Fish Radio this morning, we always have challenges, but there's a lot of good that's going on as well, and I think the public's reflecting that. So thank you. And again, Mr. President, that would conclude my report for this morning.
All right. Any questions for the general manager? Okay, seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Director Gonzalez.
Yes. Quick question. You mentioned an electric vehicle conference coming to Portland. Was that just general EVs across the board, or is there bus specific?
No, it's a global electric vehicle conference. It was in, I think, Lyon, France last year. It is coming to North America, and we will be significant partners, and we have been with PGE. So we've got a lot of work underway. We are going to be at the forefront of this conference, and as a compliment to Maria Pope, the CEO of PGE, and the governors actually part as the formal co-chair of this, and TriMet is a very active partner in this. So this will be many and all types, and we're working on a lot of things behind the scenes to try and make sure it's not only a conference, but it's a chance for this region and part of the state to celebrate the electrification side of things. So this is very exciting. City of Portland's already been contacted and is already participating on the steering committee, if we will, of this. So.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? All right, yeah, I'm looking forward to them coming to town and what we learn also with our use of our buses. We now have 5 on the street now.
5 now on the street, correct.
And
So
we're
actually ahead of
smashing today,
schedule.
maybe we'll have a few more.
Well, yes.
All right, good.
So we are in discussions, for example, to see if we get the double-decker electric bus brought up for the conference, things of that nature that might test our own mindset, let alone articulated electric buses, things of that nature. So yes, it could be scooters, bikes, cars, buses. We're working on some pretty interesting things to do around the conference to help raise the awareness of the importance of this, what electrification does to helping our planet.
All right. All right, ready to move on then. Let's go on to our consent agenda. And I usually talk about how it's routine and all the items can be approved. And when we have one item on our consent agenda, which is the approval of the board meeting minutes for July 24th, 2019. And I know Director Bauman, you saw something you wanted to call to our attention.
Yes, on the minutes for the July 24th meeting, I'd like to request one change, and that is on page 1, about 2/3 of the way down, under the report on the Committee on Accessible Transportation. Third to the last line, there's reference to Jane Campbell, and that should be Jan.
Jan Campbell. Oh, good catch. Thank you.
And that's it.
All right. Any other comments or changes to the minutes? Okay, hearing none then, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda
So
as
moved.
presented?
Second.
I heard the motion, I'm not sure who did that. Oh, down here?
It's over here.
And
I'll do the second.
all right. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none then, all in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. All right, let's move on to our resolutions when we have a number of them. The first is Resolution 19-08-59, which is authorizing a contract with Gillig LLC for the purchase of 5 40-foot zero-emission electric buses for fixed route service. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. Let's maybe call up Ed Bennett if he's available to have any technical questions to respond to. So in this case, this purchase supported by the $2.3 million Lono grant from the FTA, or Federal Transit Administration. With TriMet's local share of $3.8 million it provides, we'll be able to buy 5 of these buses. Again, part of our pathway to getting out of total diesel by 2040 or before. Gillig, in this case, is also the manufacturer of our diesel bus fleet. They've been a reliable partner, and they continue to be so. They will be manufactured at their facility in California. They will also feature an electrified powertrain by Cummins, and a benefit to us is Cummins also has a location in North Portland that we'll be able to take local support advantage of. Gillig was also named in the grant application and the requested contract is considered a procurement by non-competitive methods under the FDA guidelines. Again, our past experience with Gillig has been favorable, and it continues to do so as they've transitioned to the electrification side of the fleet. They have about 1,000 employees. Their workforce diversity is about 68% minority and 9% female. And unless there's questions of Ed Bennett, your approval is recommended.
Questions for the general manager or staff? Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No.
What did I
Okay.
miss, Ed?
All right. Questions for staff? Yes.
I do have a quick question. When will these 5 buses be delivered?
Third quarter of 2021.
2021?
No.
Thank you.
What's the lead time? Good question.
So it takes 18 months
Yeah.
plus by the time the order's placed, typically 18 months to 20 months typically by trying to bring them in. And once you bring them in, then you have to go through a whole testing and commissioning period for its receipt before you actually put them in service to the public. And so.
Other questions?
Yes, thank you. My question in regard to the training, what is the training consist of? And is it maintenance training, or is it training on just how to drive the buses, or what does the training consist of?
So the training.
Why don't you get the mic a little bit closer to you there?
Sure, sorry. The training will consist of several things. Operator training on just the components to that subfleet series of a Gillig electric bus, training for the mechanics because the propulsion system is different than the New Flyer one that we have, and then also, most importantly, first responder training with the local fire department on just the safety aspect of how to handle an event if there was a thermal event on that bus, just standard operating procedures.
And a follow-up, how extensive is this training? How long does it take?
Generally, the driver's orientation is an 8-hour class. First responders is an 8-hour class. And for the mechanics, it's probably 8-hour class over 4 to 5 days. So anywhere from 32 to 40 hours of high voltage training.
Thank you.
Director Simmons?
Something that you mentioned raised a question with me having to do with some of our early electric buses are by a different vendor. Is it New Flyer?
Correct.
Yeah. And now with these having a different, you said, propulsion system. So from an agency standpoint, is there a disadvantage based on maintenance requirements and things by purchasing electric buses from different vendors that require different training?
Well, I mean, let's just say the basic overall training is going to be the same, but components from one manufacturer to another might be different.
So there's no standardization within the industry that supplies electric buses then?
Well, there is a standardization. However, for an example, on the New Flyer bus, that is a quick charge bus.
Okay.
And on this, which has a 200 kilowatt battery pack, on this Cummins propulsion system would be 440 long range.
Okay.
So it's
okay.
just
So that
a
helps
couple
to-
different components. as
Okay,
well.
that helps me to understand. I know the difference between the quick charge and the long.
So the only thing I might just add to what Ed commented on is a couple things. One is there will be an increased cost. The second, you run 2 different kinds of fleets, you have different inventory costs.
Right.
So
Okay.
that will be a difference. We don't believe it's, I'll call, significantly material. But the other more important part is, as we're just new, not only as an industry, but for sure at TriMet, trying to learn about the different technologies, we're trying to get a different mixture of bus types in here to learn what is the best. And the manufacturers are also sending out different versions because they're learning too. So we're trying to get an intentional mixture in our fleet at a small level to get to that, what I referred to earlier in my GM report, around us being at the leading end of what's the best way to go for the long term.
Okay.
So some of this is exploratory, still the ability to before you make that long-term decision.
Okay.
Other questions? Seeing none, is the board ready to offer a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-59?
So moved.
Have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Have a second. Is there any further discussion? I would just say, good opportunity to learn with some additional funding from the federal government. Congratulations for those involved.
Yeah. I might just add, if I may, Mr. President, just a couple things. One, I really want to give Roland Hoskins and Ed Bennett a lot of credit here. There's a lot of work that goes into not only dealing with the base fleet that you run, but getting to new technology, new fleet, and all the trying to pick up all the things that aren't known. And to Ed's leadership, it's just been, and Roland's, it's just been a great benefit to this agency. So a big thanks to them. And part of our learning is also to learn from the mechanics, the people who work on these buses, the people who will know them and sweat and toil them. We want to get their feedback on this as well, because it really does take a village for us to try and get the right information. So, Ed, thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Hearing none then, all in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 19-08-59, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next resolution, which is Resolution 19-08-60, which is authorizing a contract modification with Herman Miller, Inc. for furniture and ancillary services. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. So as you know, Herman Miller is a furniture vendor whose services were procured by a national cooperative purchasing organization for the public sector called Omnia Partners. TriMet is a member of this cooperative and has been using the services since moving our administrative offices to Harrison. I think it's over 5 years now in time. We made that move to agency growth. We continue to grow today, as you know, from HB 17, the employer payroll tax, and will achieve additional growth for quite a number of years still to come. As a result, we're increasing our office space, not only for the administration, but also for some of our operations and maintenance. We're dealing with the existing assets and getting as much consolidation as possible out of it, and with that comes changes. The resolution before you today now requests that the board increase TriMet's current contract with Herman Miller, from 1.3 to $2.6 million. These funds are essential as we build out Powell Garage, because you try and think of the whole network that's going on and where we have the right people, right place, right type of work environment. The Columbia bus base, so we've got Powell, the Columbia bus base, the new transit police office, as well as furniture needs at Center and Harrison Square. Our staff is satisfied with Herman Miller's performance of the existing contract, and your approval of the resolution is recommended here.
Thank you, Mr.
Dee,
General
did I
Manager.
miss anything?
Oh,
You
I'm
wanna-
sorry.
No, you didn't, but I'm here to answer any questions you might
Okay.
have.
All right, thank you. Questions by the board? I hear none. Is there then a resolution to approve, or excuse me, a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-60?
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this resolution? Hearing none, then all in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 19-08-60, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to Resolution 19-08-61, which is authorizing contracts with EC Electric and Team Electric for on-call general electric equipment installation services.
Great.
Mr. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. These contractors would respond, in this case, when TriMet's closed-circuit television communication systems specifically require work of low voltage and power electricians. These contracts replace two existing on-call electric service contracts that are really at the expiry time. TriMet did select EC Electric and Team Electric through a competitive invitation to bid. The contracts are, in this case, are recommended because some of the calls are going to be urgent, and we want to make sure that A, understand our work, and also want to ensure the contract will be available to perform the work. The contract amount is for $3 million, and it covers a 5-year period for us. Each contractor would be allocated, in this case, about $1.5 million, and we would take steps to allocate the work as equitably as possible and based on performance. The contractor would only be paid for the work when it's requested and performed. In the case of EC Electric, their workforce is 12.7% minority and 13% female. The Team Electric workforce is less so at 3% minority and about 2% female. TriMet does not anticipate any subcontracting opportunities here with this, and we encourage the use of qualified minority and female employees for those roles if they arise. Services for the contract, they'll be fully funded through the grant from the Department of Homeland Security and including IT's approved budget for FY 2020. And I think AJ is here somewhere in the building if you have any technical questions on this and your approval is requested.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Questions by the board? Yes. I suspected Director Edwards might have a question.
Yes, I do have a question regarding the diversity issue, especially when the team comes in at 3.6 and 1.8. Did you question them about those numbers and why they were so low?
We did, and they're attempting to get them up. They didn't really have a good answer as to why so low.
My belief in this is that if it's close work, the work should go to EC Electric from their efforts perspective on diversification.
Okay.
I think it should be earned through performance and those improvements, personally.
Okay, thank you.
Director Baumann?
I just have a question about some of the numbers on the second page of the memo. The bids were $107,000 per year, but the contract amount over 5 years is $1.5 million to each contractor, which works out to about $300,000 a year.
Right. So what we did is gave each group a hypothetical scope and had them price that hypothetical scope. Because it's an on-call contract, we don't know exactly how much it was, and so that's why we weren't trying to say exactly for a year, here's what we project. It was just giving them apples to apples to make a comparison and give us a quote on their rates. So that's why there's the difference. And the reason that we're asking the amount for the 5-year is actually $500,000 less than the previous on-call contracts for the same time frame. So that's we're basing the total amount on what the previous contract we had paid over this for the same services over that same period of time, and the part that you see where we asked for the bid was just a hypothetical scope of work.
Okay. And you're saying the total contract is less than the previous 5-year term because the practical results were that not the entire amount was used, is that correct?
And we anticipate slightly less work over that time.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Yes.
So 2 quick questions. One that piggybacks off Director Edwards' question in regards to diversity. I believe that we don't have much of an opportunity if we hit the total contract amount to look at using EC Electric more than the 1.5 million because we're authorizing 1.5 million to each. Is that correct? So the last sentence here says the resolution would authorize the issuance of contracts up to 1.5 million to each contractor. So if
I see.
So if EC, their diversity is demonstrably different than that of Team, we couldn't actually allocate additional work outside of the 1.5 million based on the resolution. If I'm reading that correctly.
Yes,
I think that's correct.
That's correct. That would be correct.
Okay.
Right.
I just wanted to clarify that because I was thinking the same thing
that's
until I
fair.
got to that sentence in
I
regards
think
to
that's correct.
the ability to allocate that work differently based on that diversity. The other comment I have is in regards to the difference that we sometimes see in the presentation of these types of resolutions where we've got multiple bidders and contracts, where, as a board, we see a lot of the resolutions that come forward to us, but the difficulty then becomes how do we evaluate each resolution when they don't come in a similar format? So like with this one, we referenced that there were 169 vendors, 22 vendors viewed the solicitation. We don't know how many actually bid on the contract, which is something that we sometimes get. Okay. I would absolutely recommend that these procurements in this space specifically. I know it can be a little bit different when we're looking at the non-low bid contracts and things like that, but this is a contract that's in the space that we could have that grid that tells us kind of what were the criteria that were utilized. Because as I'm looking at this, similar to Director Edwards, you may be a doctor.
It's a Freudian slip.
Yeah, maybe you're on your way to your PhD. To what Director Edwards questioned, as I look at this, we've got such a delta between the diversity numbers, and I have no idea if there were anybody that was in between those diversity numbers. And so it's just all about the presentation and what the board sees, so that we're able to kind of consistently look at this and ascertain some of the same and glean some of the same information that allows us to make these decisions.
Yeah, good. That's good feedback. Okay.
Other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
This is a point of clarification of what happens next should this resolution be approved. Once we move forward, is the intent to issue on-call service contracts as direct awards? Is there going to be a competitive bid between the two vendors in any instance? Is there a threshold where you would come back to us in specific instances for contracts under this?
Typically what we do with contracts like this or any on-call contract is once you have multiple firms set up, so say we need 10 cameras installed somewhere, we will quickly call both and get a quote for the same work, and then typically go with the lower vendor is how it typically works.
And is there any governing policy outside of this resolution that would force you to bring specific contract awards back to the board because it might be above a certain amount, or is that all captured as long as it's under 1.5?
Don't believe so, right, Shelley? No, I don't believe so.
As long as it's
This is your authorization.
got it.
So the intent of this is actually to set up the cap that allows them to work within.
Correct.
And if they want to come to exceed that cap, they'd have
Then we
to
have
come
to come
back
back
to
to
us
the
for further.
Okay.
And if they wanted to change the allocations, they'd have to do that too. But that can be done by actions of the board.
And though I know there's no indication this is the intent, this wouldn't preclude from a 1.5 million direct award coming out.
You mean to each one, or?
To each one, right.
I think once this is approved, it's for both.
I mean, the agency could a direct award without needing to come back to the board.
Oh, yeah,
That's
yeah.
Correct, that's
Yeah, yeah.
correct. They can issue work orders up to that amount. Yep, I got-
Even if it were a single work order, is what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yes.
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 Okay, got it.
Which I think would be probably counter to an on-call type of.
Exactly.
I'd suggest they'll be captured, and it's not an on-call environment. There's something more structural if you got a $1.5 million ask coming.
Correct.
Right.
Just wanted to clarify that within the way the resolution's structured.
Director Edwards?
I guess I would like to ask that we also make sure that that Team Electric is aware of the board's concerns regarding those diversity numbers.
I made a note to make sure that we touch base with them and get a better answer on why it was so low, and we can report back.
Thank you.
And I would like just to come back to the point where the allocations are equal, but if they're on call and if their rates are close, if that's the ceiling, you can allocate to EC Electric first if they've got, they're close on the rate up until that max of the ceiling. So there's still lots of room of play before you get to the ceiling. So the goal may not even be needed to use the full 1.5 million each.
Other questions? Seeing none, is there then a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-61?
So moved.
Second.
And a motion and a second. Any further discussion or comments on this item? I guess I just want to, what I'm hearing today is, again, just for anybody watching this, is this board is very keen and concerned about making sure that our consultants, contractors do what they can to employ women, minorities in their workforce, and we expect them to be leaders in that. And so I think what you're seeing is there's some disappointment by that in this one firm here that we're looking at today. And I think the other thing that's interesting is that, as Director Stovall noted, is that this is where I think our work in terms of utilizing other types of procurement process does give us a lot of flexibility to gauge that. And so oftentimes we really can't do anything more than just a low bid and really can't set the standards in terms of our expectations. But again, letting people know as we're doing, I think with this dialogue of our desires is really important for all of those contractors and consultants to understand. Great, yes.
Just a point of clarification based on an earlier question. When I read the resolution, it indicates that you would authorize and execute contracts in the amount not more than $1.5 million each over a 5-year life. And I was under the impression that if we used one contractor more than the other, as long as all the contracts didn't exceed $3 million, we would be okay. And
the way it's currently drafted is each contractor will get an award up to $1.5 million. If we want to, after we've used it for a while, say, we really like one of them more than the other, and we're using more, we would be coming back to the board for further
that's when you
authorization.
would come back to us. Okay, great. That helps to understand. Thank you.
Other yes.
Yes, and just to make a point about performance as we monitor the on-call service contracts, I think in light of both Director Edwards' comments around diversity numbers and the aspiration to make sure that it's clear that that's important to us, I think it behooves us to evaluate as we look at the performance of these on-call service providers to see how those numbers track in the delivery of services under this contract. And I would say without proposing any requirements in the form of apprenticeship, I think understanding both the staff diversity and to what extent they've leveraged apprentices, I think helps to give a clear sense for what is important to us as we consider future on-call service contracts.
Agreed. That's worthy of some further discussion. So yeah, thank you very much.
So actually, I'm gonna say something that probably is gonna be probably a little bit frustrating, but I am pretty moved by the effort that as an agency we need to actually be part of the solution and not continuing the issue. And I would actually propose, if it's possible, that we do make a nominal movement in the dollar allocations. I would say we move to 1.75 million on EC, and we moved to 1.25 million on team. You've done a lot of work to get it to where it is, but at this point, the difference in these diversity numbers is so stark that I think that sends a message. It still honors the tremendous amount of work that you've done, but I think we send clarity to everybody that wants to work with this agency and organization that we do mean business. We would have to look at, we would have to change any of the motions that have been made, but I want to know the flexibility of being able to do something like that.
I think that's a reasonable request. I think what we could do is, the only question is, we could make the amendment now, or I'm not sure of timing here, we could bring it back to the next board cycle.
I think we could bring it back. It's an on-call contract.
It's on-call?
Yeah, so we can bring
We
it
could
back.
Is there any
next
problem,
board.
I'm looking at the general counsel, any problem with making these changes right now?
We do the two motions that we always do, which is the first motion would be to amend,
Right.
and then the second motion would be, assuming that approves, the second motion would be to vote on the resolution as amended.
Right.
So you could do that. Sure.
Okay.
Well, we want to know if the board is even open to
Yeah,
that.
so you want to propose a motion to a change, to
An amendment?
Yeah, so I propose that we amend resolution number 1908-62 to actually reallocate the maximum contract available on the on-call to EC Electric to 1.75 million and to Team Electric to 1.25 million.
Do I hear a second for that?
Second.
Here, second?
Well, he said 1908-62.
Oh, yeah, it's
61.
61.
Thank you. But I still have
We heard a second over.
we have a second, we have a motion and a second. Discussion of this?
Yes, let's have some discussion. There's, I like where you're going with this, and I'm all for putting our money where our mouth is. And I just wanted to offer an alternative approach. I'm not sure that that I have a formal amendment language yet, but the intention that I'm going for is to recognize that we're still in a low bid environment, even if we shift these caps, and it doesn't really set any priority in the upfront on-call services to recognize that this agency or that this company is better established with our values for the service providers. So we would still be going into a low bid environment. Is there an opportunity to include a more of a best value philosophy that recognizes, perhaps in the form of a percent discount on the price of how they're compared to the others based on the diversity profile of the company? And either way, we might hit the caps, but what it does is it institutes a system whereby there's already an incentive, as it were, for a service provider that has that greater diversity profile without changing the cap. It just means they're more likely to hit their cap sooner, and we can talk about what happens once a service provider hits a cap.
We could certainly start over and just drop this and start over and attempt to do what you're doing, and then maybe try and work with Team Electric to see how they can improve, and maybe others would be more viable then, since it wouldn't be low bid.
Do we have a precedent where we have instituted best value approaches on on-call contracts where it's,
Not that I'm aware of.
where we take the low bid number as one piece of the criteria?
Unfortunately, a low bid contract is a low bid contract. That is the qualification you can look at as price. What we do, and what you're going to see later in the board materials, is, if you want to do an exemption from low bid, and you guys vote as the contract review board to grant an exemption to low bid, then you can include a variety of other factors, including workforce diversity numbers, things like that. So
That would be a very different model than what we have on this document today.
That's correct.
Again, I think you're referring to what's done in the private sector a lot. And I think there's some public sector requirements that don't allow us to be quite as flexible as the private sector here. So it would be interesting if we could actually justify this in a other than a low bid situation. But I appreciate what you're trying to do. I think the message is being sent very clearly with the motion that was offered by Director Stovall. So I'm comfortable with moving that forward to that. But I think what this board is very clear on is we want to see performance here. And I think maybe a dialogue about how we want to gauge performance on some of these, so we have additional information, would be good. But again, if the staff wants to look at this again, I think you're going to be back here with the same thing, and maybe some different allocation of the amounts like you've got proposed, because of the limitations, frankly, as a public agency we're stuck with. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I would certainly not propose we go back to the drawing board, seeing today's market climate with getting 2 responsive bids after a solicitation that started with 169 invitations. I think it behooves us, especially with a specific narrow scope of this nature with CCTV services. I would be comfortable just proposing the discussion. I think it leaves me a little bit of homework to look for precedent. I know there's best value contracting methods that conflict with a standard low bid, but it certainly is something that is worth exploring for opportunities that might not be so narrow and specific in focus.
I agree with you.
I'd be comfortable moving forward.
Okay. So, other discussion on the motion to amend the allocations? Are we ready to take a vote on this? Okay. All those in favor of the motion to amend the previous motion to reflect the changes in allocation between the 2 contractors signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved. So let's go back then to the main motion, which is now has the different amounts for the two general contractors. Is there any further discussion on that? Seeing none then, all those in favor of the motion to approve the revised resolution 19-08-61, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Good discussion, board. I like that. That's good. We're gonna learn some more as we go through here. All right, I'm going to move on to the next resolution, which is Resolution 19-08-62, which is exempting from competitive bidding requirements a contract for construction manager / general contractor, we call it CMGC, services for the red line extension and reliability improvement projects. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. So this project, as you're aware, does extend the max red line service to the Fairplex Hillsborough Airport MAX station. It also brings significant more light rail service to the west side and is projected to reduce our ridership by about 5,000 daily trips. Also, the project will improve our reliability of the overall MAX system by converting 2 choke points from the single to double track, particularly out of the airport area. And the project is currently at the 30% design stage. The resolution before you now requests the board approval for TriMet to engage in a competitive RFP process when selecting CMGC services, and allows us to select a contractor based on a number of factors, including price. Among them would be safety, quality, experience, disadvantaged business enterprise, and workforce diversity programs. What you have before you is for a $200 million project that's intended to be funded by the Small Starts Grant from the FTA and also from TriMet's general fund. I will mention here that the $200 million currently we're out doing a risk assessment as well while this is going on, but there is as I think part of the communication I've sent to the board previously is that we were just awarded to the FDA to move to this next stage, and part of that stage is we have in August, or the FDA has an annual August 23rd cutoff date, so we're moving very quickly here. If it doesn't make that cutoff, it all gets pushed back by about another year. So we do not want to lose the year. So we have a $200 million anticipated starting point. It may vary a bit. We're trying to negotiate some money, supplemental money. It may go up around 2% or so beyond that once we know more information and working with the FDA on the details. So you have $200 million in front of you today. That may be as high as 205, but maybe something less if we can negotiate more with partners. So I just wanted to give context should we ever need to come back for a few $1 million incrementally to this once we know more information down the road. So with that, your approval is requested. And Steve, if you have any comments that I've missed, please jump in.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Questions or comments? This just starts the process.
Correct.
What's the timing you think you might be back to us with some results from this competitive process?
I think this would allow us to go out to the marketplace, so by the end of the year, we'd probably be back for the
Okay.
contract.
All right, well, that seems good. I look forward to seeing what we come up with on this.
Yeah. So, okay.
All right. Is the board ready then to make a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-62?
So moved.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
Second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none then, all those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 19-08-62, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And again, in this one, I'd just like to give a lot of credit to Steve and his staff behind the scenes trying to meet this very fast timeline. There's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes, so thanks to Kate McKinnon and others. So thanks, Steve.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to the next resolution, which is Resolution 19-08-63, which is authorizing a contract modification with Stacy and Whitbeck, Inc. for construction manager, general contractor services, CMGC, for the Steel Bridge transit improvements and track rehabilitation projects. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you. Yes, in this case, if this modification is approved, it will advance package 4 of 9 in this large project. This package 4 provides for track rehabilitation in Gresham, furthering the efforts to upgrade some of the oldest track in our system. To prevent additional and the unnecessary disruptions to the MAX, the Blue Line, the Gresham Crossing Panel replacements project will occur during the Cleveland Civil and Signals Improvements Project later this year, trying to combine, to synergize. So only one disruption will be necessary. The crews are currently, they're in week 2 right now, and nearing the end of the current, what you may see in the news and the disruptions that are currently going on there of the Lloyd Max Improvement Project. That was package 3 of this program. So you can see this is a very large overall rehabilitation program for the system. That 2-week disruption project for the blue, green, red services between Rose Quarter and Lloyd Center, we look to have that completed here by Sunday, if not sooner. So far on time, on budget, so that's very good. This additional contracted authority requested in the resolutions for about $1.5 million. And the funding for this is captured in the fiscal 20 capital budget process. So far, as you've seen in the past, we've experienced, Stacy Whitbeck has performed very well so far in this project. There's been no safety incidents or disputes of anything at all. For package 4, Stacy Whitbeck expects to achieve about 18% utilization of MW, ESB, SD, BVE firms, and for this, your approval is requested.
Thank you for that staff report. Questions of staff on this item? Yes.
I just have a quick question on under criteria. Can you explain what local presence means? That received 10 points. And I'm sorry, looking at the chart under the procurement process. There's a table that says criteria.
This is resolution 0863.
I think it's another one. I think it's our next resolution.
I think I'm jumping ahead.
Yep, I think you are too.
I think you might be
Okay.
one ahead.
I'll save that for the next one.
Okay. So,
like,
note to
"Ooh."
file for Steve. Question to come.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No problem.
All right. Other questions, comments?
No.
I'm seeing none. Is there then a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-63?
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. Any further discussion? Yes.
So I remember at the last board meeting, we were talking about the Steel Bridge as well in another resolution. And I know that some folks had concerns around earthquake preparedness as well as other factors that public comment has provided this morning. Can you talk a little bit as to how, with this construction project, how some of those concerns will continue to be addressed?
Certainly, in terms of earthquake preparedness for the steel bridge, our project is seeking to do a zero balancing. So throughout this design process, as we go through all the different iterations of design, we're basically putting in everything same weight as we're taking out. And in a lot of cases, we're putting in heavier rail, so that rail adds a little bit of rigidity, but that's usually not analyzed as part of the structural analysis. But overall, we're significantly improving the steel bridge, but not structural improvements.
Okay.
This is more for overall rail reliability for our system is kind of the main focus of the project.
Also, I might just supplementally add, we're not the owner of that bridge. So it's actually one of the railways, UP, Union Pacific is the owner of it, who subcontracts that out to Oregon Department of Transportation. And we're basically a sublessee under the Oregon Department of Transportation for it. So the big structural piece is we are not the owner.
Okay.
So.
Great. Thanks.
But a good worry.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's real.
Just wanted to make sure I.
Oh, no question.
It's a concern. It's a good concern, too. Other questions? Comments? Is there then a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-63?
There's a motion.
There has been.
Did I already have a motion?
Yes.
Thank you very much. You move, that's right, so we're having discussion. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, then all in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 19-08-63, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? The motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much for helping me out on that one. All right, let's move on to the next resolution.
We're going to power through this. I was wondering if we had a bio break.
Sure. I think we have a request for a break, so let's take 10 minutes?
That'd be great.
All right, thank you. Almost. All right, let's move on to the next resolution, which is Resolution 19-08-64, which is authorizing a contract with WSP USA, Inc. for design services for the facilities master plan. Mr. General Manager, you want to give us a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. So the purpose of this resolution requests the board authorize a contract with WSP USA to create the Facilities System Master Plan, and the plan itself will guide TriMet's expansion and development of facilities to support our service and operation. What's often lost is we forget how many hundreds, if not billions of dollars we actually have in facilities throughout this, throughout our region. So part of it is to make sure we actually have a cohesive plan going forward for the longer term for investment, resources, allocation of dollars. In this case, what you have before you is the selected contractor would focus on 4 key areas: the planning and anticipated growth, the architecture and space planning, civil design, and of course, cost estimation. TriMet conducted a competitive qualifications-based RFP to select the contractor for this work. WSP USA emerged as the highest-ranked proposer. They have done business with us in the past and performed appropriately. This resolution before you today authorized a contract in the amount of $2.5 million over a 5-year period. In isolation, it looks like a lot of money, but when you start to look at our broad set of facilities and infrastructure, it is significant. The task order amounts are included in the annual engineering and construction budget, and your approval is recommended for this. And Steve is still up here as well to answer any questions you might have.
All right. I know there's one question regarding the criteria.
Yes, sorry, this was the one that I was looking at, and then I got confused. So just under the second page, under the criteria points, where it says local presence, can you just explain what that criteria means?
Sure. So that criteria really is to ensure that the service providers are actually here in town when we need them, there to pick up the phone, there to come to a meeting. The firms that we've listed here are all, well, Convergence not so much, but they are nationwide firms, and so they have various expertise in various cities. And what we don't want is a master plan team, coming to us from Washington, D.C. So, they're not here. They don't understand TriMet as a client. They don't understand Portland as a city. They don't understand the values that you guys hold here. WSP in particular, that may be a new name for some, but they are formerly known as Parsons Brinkerhoff. So they were purchased by WSP. And Parsons Brinkerhoff has been a firm that we've worked with since the West Side Light Rail project. And in particular, they have staff that have done many of our facilities, such as Ruby Junction, El Monica, et cetera. And so they're really the most qualified team here. So that was a little more than you asked, Director Way.
That was helpful. Just to follow up, and so is the local presence a criteria that we use often for these types of proposals?
Yes.
Or contracts?
Yes,
Okay.
very consistently.
Okay. Great, thanks.
Other questions? Yes, Director Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the diversity again, I guess I have a question. It says 25% of the work will be given to MWESD VBE firms. Is there a drill down where the workers or the employees of the firm are considered as far as diversity as well?
Within those subcontracting firms?
Yes.
I don't believe that we drill down that far. What we rely on, Director Edwards, is their state certification as a certified disadvantaged minority, women-owned, veteran-owned business. So
my concern is that doesn't cover the workers, the employees of the firm. So I could be a firm that would qualify under that criteria.
Yes.
But at the same time, my workforce may not be diverse at all, and that's my concern.
And that could, your example is a true fact. But these are certified owners. I guess to answer your question, we do not drill down that far into the subcontractors.
Is there an opportunity to do that moving forward?
I would have to check with my procurement team,
Okay.
but we could certainly follow up with that.
Thank you.
Director Gonzalez?
Yes, just to add to that conversation, if I'm not mistaken, we have that very example in this proposal today in the form of Convergence Architecture. And again, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Convergence is a COBID certified firm in and of itself. Yet, because of their internal diversity of the firm, you could see the points are showing that Convergence got less points than WSP, who is not a COBID certified entity. And I think that's driven more so because of the diversity of the organization itself, not the ownership structure. Is that correct? Yeah. I believe Convergence is certified.
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, they're WBE, I think, yeah. It was the same firm, yeah. Yeah, so there's an example, Director Edwards, where we have a certified firm in and of itself, but the diversity category, they're not faring as well as an uncertified firm because of the composition of the workforce inside the company. Is that fair?
I believe so, yes.
I guess I would just comment on this. I think again, what you're seeing is the board is very interested in women and minorities, and at all levels in terms of how we employ this. And I think maybe it's a rich discussion about maybe just reporting on our contractors and how they're doing, both for the prime and for the sub-consultants. I think would be interesting, just so we have the data that tell us how these firms are actually performing in the future. I'm not suggesting we change that right now, but I'm thinking that it may be more informative if we actually have the kind of the total number of women, minorities, as for the prime and the subcontractors or subconsultants. And then I'm also heard, I think Director Gonzalez mentioned apprentices, and I think there's, so I think we just want to maybe in the future talk about what reporting would help us and help staff to best judge how these firms are doing, so that, again, if we're selecting these firms over and over again, we know what they're doing and how they do it. So that might be a rich discussion for maybe a further, one of our agenda briefings. Or whatever after.
But that was a briefing.
Yeah,
to come.
that's one thing. Director Gonzalez?
Yes, thank you. No, I was going to lean into that suggestion. I think to make it a clear request, I think it would be very useful as a board member, and I may not be alone, in knowing that one of the proposers is in and of itself a certified firm. I think that as we get used to firms wanting to enter into that prime level, it's going to be more likely that we see proposers, and they may not be the ones with the highest total score, but it's good to know that we have a certified firm entering into that foray. Should Convergence been the one that you were recommending, and we looked at the number 7 diversity section, it would essentially be a 100% spend before they think about, unless they start subcontracting to uncertified entities. So I think that those sorts of nuances help us understand a little better what we're looking at in the form of where we're putting our money with helping our emerging businesses and our certified business community. So I think that's a useful piece of information.
I think, just a comment, I think we'll undertake to bring back a briefing to the board on this and compare it to what other government agencies are doing as well, and what we can learn for just a broader conversation. So that'd be, if you're comfortable with that, we'll undertake that.
Thank you. And in closing, I think it's very wise. I agree wholeheartedly with Director Edwards, looking deeply not just at whether a company has a COBID certification or not, but not stopping there and making sure that we look at the organization itself, because there's opportunities to do more of what we want to do if we have the fuller picture.
Good. How's the board feeling? Is there a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-64?
So moved.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on this resolution? Hearing none, then all those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 19-08-64, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next resolution, which is Resolution 19-08-65, which is authorizing a modification to a contract with WSP USA for design services for the Division Transit Project. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you very much, Mr. Board President. So this project is currently at 90% design. With the FDA recent approval, construction is anticipated to begin this fall. So we're moving quickly. Additional work by WSP USA is necessary to advance the project to get us that next 10% to the 100% design phase. The modification, the contract here being requested is additional authority in the amount of $1.4 million to accommodate the additional necessary design work. In this proposal, WSP has indicated expect to achieve a 20% DBE participation in subcontracting work. Currently to date, they've achieved 26.5%, and they expect to maintain that level with the additional work. They performed well, WSP, overall so far in the project, and your approval is recommended here.
All right, is there any questions for staff or comments about the project and its importance to this part of the region?
Well, we know the importance. I mean, connecting downtown Portland with the greater metropolis of Gresham is incredibly important. The vitality of the state depends on this.
All right. Any other comments or questions by the board? Seeing none then. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-65?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this resolution? Hearing none then, all in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 19-08-65, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much.
The state is saved.
Say again?
And the state is saved.
All right. So we move on to the last resolution of our agenda, which is Resolution 19-08-66, which is declaring certain real property as necessary for the construction and operation of the Division Transit Project. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you very much, Mr. Board President. So state statute requires the board to make this declaration and state its purpose before TriMet can acquire specific property by purchase or eminent domain. The Division Transit Project includes more than 40 stations and 80 platforms. One was associated typically with train, but that also equals to bus in terms of bus rapid transit as well. It also brings the upgrades to roads and infrastructure to improve the safe access to the transit system. And as you well know, the Division Street is a very constrained corridor as it sits today. The design team has gone to great lengths to work with the community to have the least impact on private property as possible, but we do need and may need to acquire some real property and real property interests that come with a project such as this. So most of the interests will either be temporary construction, easements, or small acquisitions of property adjacent to the public right-of-way. We do not expect to acquire entire properties for the project. We're also confident that most, if not all, the properties will be acquired by negotiation. It would not require any condemnation or eminent domain conversations. Should it be requested, there's lots we don't know yet, but should it become necessary, our staff would come back to the board for any specific authorization and work through that process accordingly. So it's not as though it's separate and left here. We would be right back to the board. So with that, your approvals are recommended, and Lance and Steve are here for any questions either on the project itself overall or Lance specifically on the land property elements of it.
And I was reminded that we will be having a briefing on this project and also a tour of the alignment, and
that is
we'll
correct.
Point out some of the specific areas where right-of-way may
Correct.
or may not be an issue as we tour
Correct.
that facility. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Yes, Director Gonzalez.
The potential for eminent domain, I just want to make sure I understand that correctly. At this time, is it, from what we know, unexpected and unlikely that that would be a scenario?
I think the answer is yes. It's possible that we will have to file in the court and start the eminent domain process. Usually on a project like this, it happens because of schedule reasons. You're unable to settle a property file in time to get the property for the contractor to use. So instead of delaying the contractor, you file in the court, get possession, continue to negotiate. Don't expect to have any trials on this project. Most of these acquisitions are fairly small. On Portland, Milwaukee, we only had one trial for the entire project. So if you mean eminent domain trial, very unlikely. If you mean filing in court in order to get possession for schedule purposes, that will probably happen, I would imagine, a handful of times, but we come back to the board before we actually start that process.
Before filing?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. Appreciate it.
Good explanation, thank you. Yes, Director Edwards.
I guess my concern is I know scheduling is challenging, and I understand that, and I just wish that we would have an opportunity to make a physical tour or presence prior to this resolution. And I guess my question would be, do we get a second bite of the apple if for some reason we come back and have some concerns or issues with the physical walkthrough?
So this resolution essentially allows us to start making offers to property owners. Again, if actual condemnation is necessary, we will have to come back, but this is a statutory requirement before we can make offers. So it's kind of a schedule-driven resolution. And this doesn't set out exact legal descriptions of the property. This just notifies property owners who may be impacted by the project. The exact parameters of the acquisition are required in a subsequent resolution if we are moving forward to eminent domain. So we're at 90% design. There will be some small tweaks, I think, to the project design, but that doesn't affect this resolution unless we impact a property that isn't named in this resolution.
I missed that last part.
The actual exact design of the project doesn't impact this resolution unless we are going to impact a property that isn't included in this resolution, and we would have to come back to you for that exact property.
Okay, but the property that is included, if I'm a private property owner and I'm going to have that eminent domain hanging over my head if I don't take the offer, and that's a concern that I have.
That's correct, yes.
And I mean, I'm also hearing Director Edwards say that most of the board members are going on a sort of a walking tour of the site next week. And so in terms of, I think voting on this resolution and then just the timing for board members to be actually on site and to take a look at this, there might be a timing piece, is what I'm hearing. And if that's so, then I would support us to maybe move this agenda item to next month.
So maybe I can try a little bit since, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The process included an approval of the preferred route, the locally preferred alternative, some time ago, and the board did approve that.
Correct.
So there already has been board action on the route in terms of approval.
So, correct. So the route is established, is agreed to with the community. In my own words, I'd say what you have before you today is a trigger mechanism to allow the project to proceed, and in it there is no specific actions on any eminent domain conversations at all, but it just triggers all the activity that goes on. Eminent domain is one of the instruments. It's I'll call it a last resort tool available to entities like ourselves. So this, I think the importance of this is advancing this now. There is no property that I don't believe, unless Lance would advise otherwise, that says we think that one is an eminent domain property. There's nothing been identified because you don't know until you actually go in and negotiate. We think there's a very low chance that there's an eminent domain property coming into this, but it activates that whole process available to us, which you have to do by state statute. So that is a requirement. This is almost a trigger mechanism for us to go enter that next stage of negotiations.
It's my understanding, by looking at all of these properties and looking at the diagrams that you've provided to us, we're talking about, in most cases, a few square feet. We're not talking about taking a whole block or a building or anything like that. We're talking about just enough space for a right-of-way or an easement or something like that, right?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
Director Stovall?
Well, so I'd love to hear Director Edwards what his concerns are, because I'd love to see kind of what those issues are, if they're specifically in the eminent domain concept, or if it's the alignment. Both President Warner and I were on the board throughout the entire orange line, and when we hear eminent domain, some of our concerns rise. When I first heard it, I was like, okay, how does this really work? But once we had gone through the process, understanding that a lot of it's timing, in the majority of those situations that we even utilize that mechanism on, it was pretty much I'd call it a friendly type of conversation to move things along and ensure there's some benefits to the property owner in some regards. So in that instance, I'm very comfortable moving forward with this agenda item, and everything that goes with some property acquisitions and all of those things come back through the board. When it's time to execute on any of those things that we're looking to move forward, I see this more as the overall approval so that we can actually even start, the process. And if we don't, and from a timing perspective, the longer we wait on just getting this in place so that we have the opportunity to even have the discussions, the timeline of being able to move the division transit line forward becomes in jeopardy. And so that's a concern that I have in regards to that. But for the newer board members, this does not lock us into eminent domain processes of specific properties. It doesn't lock us into purchasing properties that are currently potentially something that we would need to acquire to move it forward. We still have ample opportunity to walk through any of those approvals if they would ever come up. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct, yes.
Excellent.
Director Edwards?
Well, and thank you, Director Stovall. So that certainly helps alleviate my concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And also to your concerns, I think my advice was if you see something that based on past experience or some other experience that you've seen as a result of other projects, when we do the tour, bring those to our attention, and because we want to make sure that we are as amenable as possible to dealing with the issues out there. And as Director Stovall said, our staff is very talented at working with property owners, and I think some of the concerns that you and I talked about were business interests who maybe had their access impacted during construction, and I think that's an area where we are also very skilled at providing the access, both temporary and dealing with the impacts of that. So let's go look at it, and if you see something else, I would definitely encourage you to raise it at that time, because we do have time to deal with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yes.
Yes. Question about Exhibit A. If I was a property owner and I showed up on this list of properties, how should I construe that? That TriMet will be getting in touch with me, or that I may or may not be having an improvement abutting my property? What's the right way to interpret that list?
You would interpret it as meaning there is an impact from the project on your property, and it's kind of further defined in Exhibit B, which is the kind of the project drawing, which shows a general impact, what the general impact on each property is going to be. So, and our public affairs team has been out in the field and in touch with, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but most if not all of the affected property owners. And then eventually the real estate team will be in touch to make the offers. So most of these people are already aware. If they're not and they see their address on here, I think if you tie it to Exhibit B, you'll have a pretty good idea of what the expected impact is.
So it's not just an adjacency or abutment. There's some encroachment of sorts within their parcel boundary.
Correct. And many of these, a temporary construction easement would be where we have to step on their property to do the construction in the right-of-way. So we use their property for a time.
Got it.
And then we return it to them. But it's necessary to, say, for instance, do construction work on the adjacent sidewalk or the adjacent roadway or the adjacent bike lane or whatever the case is. But it's not a permanent acquisition, it's a temporary acquisition, so it's a property impact that we have to compensate for, but at the end of the day, that property is returned fully to the...
And the list, of course, includes both temporary and permanent.
Correct.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments for staff? Good dialogue, good discussion. Is the board feel comfortable with offering a motion to approve Resolution 19-08-66?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there further discussion on this motion? Hearing none, then all in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 19-08-66, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. And we look forward to our tour next week. So, Mr. General Manager and Board, that concludes the ordinance, or the resolutions, and I see no ordinances. So, is there any other business to come before the board today?
None at this time for me.
Board, do we know of anything? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to adjourn our business meeting. And I'm going to say we probably don't need a break since we just took one, right?
Thanks.
Right.
So should we move right into the briefings? Mr. General Manager, we have 2 on the agenda.
Yes. The first one is about transit-oriented development. And so wanted to, for some of the board members, there's a variety of experience with transit-oriented development. And I think this is a very important piece of strategy for the agency. We do not have currently a policy for transit-oriented development and how we approach it within our properties and our partnerships. It's been almost one-off, and there's been some real success stories that have come with some of them. I think we can probably all think about the ones, and usually the pain that comes with sometimes transit-oriented development. But as we look forward, we look at the region with this growing region, and as we work with our municipal partners and low-income housing, affordable housing, other instruments that are important instruments that are part of getting access to our very, very valuable property. So part of it is also creating access to transit in different ways than not just building a bus line or a train line and build and they will come. Part of it is leveraging our footprint, getting the commercial advantage that we can get to reinvest back in the business, identifying the first step is a policy, and then the second step would move, should the board be comfortable with this at the right time, then we would move to the strategy by property type that we would have to say what types of things could be or should be in play. We automatically go to a bus transit center can have transit-oriented development, not just associated with trains. Or it could be a park and ride lot. So what are the potential uses we may want to consider, and also with public consultation with the different community members that make sense. So this is moving us to the next level of transit-oriented development, and I've done a lot of this in past lives, and my own personal opinion on this is the region does not build high enough. We have to work, we need to densify up as other more global cities have looked at to take advantage of even the municipal benefits where the utility costs of emergency responders, for example, if the population is coming, goes not only wide, but where the developer actually will carry that same number of population servicing over one address. They'll carry the cost of this in a way for us to help increase this densification access, reduce crime, help with CEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, et cetera. So this is taking us to try and help our agency to the next level. This takes years. This is not a short-term thing, and you have to be market responsive. And if you remember back to the reorganization that we did, we actually placed, we're going to hire a specific person in under Shelley's shop in Lance's area of responsibility to help the private sector get through government regulations and processes for our partners, because we have to think about their terms. If they don't like the investment, they'll go to another marketplace, whether it be in this region or another city. So we have to be market competitive, not just policy competitive. So part of this is to set some of that stage, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lance, Shelley, and Bob Hastings, who are amazing in what they're doing. So,
thanks, Doug. So I was just going to give a little bit of the history on how we came to this current draft of our TOD guidelines, talk a little bit about next steps, and then walk through the draft guidelines for you. And happy to hear questions, comments, suggestions. I'd love to get input. So essentially this, as Doug alluded to, this kind of process started when we had the agency reorganization back in December. Our real property group became our real estate and transit-oriented development group. And with that, came the need to work on some guidelines to help us as we establish this new program. So we've been working on these, I would say, probably 6 or 7 months so far. We've received lots of great input, obviously, from the general manager, the executive team, TriMet staff. We have been meeting with other agencies on the West Coast, talked to LA Metro, talked to Sound Transit, talked to BART, talked to RTD, to kind of figure out what other jurisdictions are doing in this regard. So we've put quite a bit of work into this draft to this point. Briefed Finance and Audit Committee last month on it, took some of their suggestions into this newest draft. Worked with Director Gonzalez a little bit, who had some great ideas that we incorporated into this. So there's been quite a bit of work and back and forth, and this is probably, I don't know, the 7th or 8th draft to get to where we are now. So the next steps are, obviously today, talk to you about the current draft, take suggestions and input, need to discuss our guidelines with our jurisdictional partners, get their take on it, and then hopefully come back to the board in September for adoption if all goes well. So that's kind of the next step here. So with that, I'll kind of walk through the guidelines again. Questions at any time? It's great. So based on comments from the F&A committee, we established this summary statement that you'll see on the first page, which I think was a great idea. It's take this 2.5, 3-page document we have and boil it down to kind of its essence. What's the most important? What are the most important goals? What are the most important means to achieve the goals? What's this program really about? Because we all know that even though, you know, we'd love developers and our jurisdictional partners to read and digest the whole thing, lots of people may not do that. So this is a kind of a great introduction to what our guidelines really say. And so I'll just walk through this real quickly, but basically, you know, one of our goals is to make our region one of the most livable places in the world. We think transit-oriented development is a great mechanism to help achieve that goal for a lot of the reasons that Doug talked about. And, you know, developing at and near transit stations is a great idea. It's obviously going to reduce congestion by increasing transit ridership, which brings environmental benefits. And if done right, you can create community at those locations as well. So that's kind of the overview of the TOD program. And in order to facilitate that, we say that TriMet will promote equitable development at transit stations. We want to include density. We want a mix of uses. We want a mix of incomes in our residential development to create places where people want to live, work, play, and visit. The concept of mobility hubs is big in the transit-oriented development world, and Doug's really helped us kind of hone that. And that's the idea that transit and other forms of transportation need to kind of coexist in these locations to allow people who live there to live without a private automobile if they choose to do so. Obviously, we want to promote affordable housing. We want to be mindful of anti-displacement strategies as appropriate for the individual location where the development may be occurring. Internally, we want to take a look at TriMet's potential development sites. These may include park and ride sites or other locations where TOD may be a possibility. We want to be smart about, we want to prioritize, so we are smart and thoughtful about where we start the process, and we pick individual sites that we think are prime for success to start with and kind of go from there. We want to prioritize. We want to be a little more proactive, a little less reactive to communications we may get from a developer about a site that's not high on the priority list. Well, do we really want to take that on now, or do we want to wait? We want to require developers to utilize the TOD principles that we talk about in our guidelines, and we want to help them to do so. We want to encourage local jurisdictions to change zoning codes and heighten density restrictions to the extent necessary to facilitate effective TOD at our transit stations. So, for instance, there may be a restriction on the number of square feet you can develop at a certain location, or the height you can go at a certain location that we think maybe isn't as much as it could or should be. So we want to work with our jurisdictional partners to see if we can get kind of maximum density at the TOD sites. The next bullet's kind of a piggyback on that, which is encouraging jurisdictions to remove other policy barriers, and specifically thinking about parking ratios here, which it's amazing how, when you start talking about this concept, how much of development is driven by parking ratios and parking needs. It's the less parking that's required, generally the more development you can build. It's a lot cheaper. We want to promote TriMet's TOD guidelines to our public and private sector partners throughout the region. We've already started doing that. We want to continue to do that. And the last bullet here is to generate revenue to TriMet and value capture opportunities to TriMet. By value capture, it could be a lot of things. I think the simplest example is if we get a developer to build something that TriMet can use, for instance, an operator break room or something like that we would have otherwise had to build ourselves. That's a cost savings that continues on through time. So those are the highlights of the TOD policy. The next 2.5 pages dive into that in a little more detail, and I'm happy to go through those as well, if you'd like me to, or not.
Let's see where the board is on this. Right, more questions? Yes, Director Edwards.
Thank you very much for that explanation. And maybe I'm in the wrong quadrant, but internally, is there any orientation or training that goes along with this for staff?
We are, and Bob may be able to speak to this a little bit better than I can. We are working with our internal partners as well. So Bob, maybe you could talk a little bit about what we're doing to socialize this internally.
And as we're looking across the region and we're looking across our existing sites and properties, to think about transfer and development also means we have to think about how we do our operational service, number one, how we do, as Doug mentioned, safety and security. So really, our whole agency are all stakeholders in TOD. We're looking to grow opportunities, which means we also have to look with our partners within the agency what these things look like. An example would be an existing park and ride. And maybe we're observing that the utilization isn't as strong as it could be. Maybe there's an opportunity to increase transit utilization by converting some of that for development. As we think about that, what does that mean in terms of our maintenance facilities, our operations? So all those dimensions really are very important. They're very also site-specific. As we think about from the east to the west and also downtown, each site has their own kind of dynamic and their own both culture and context. Some of them might be historical. Some of them might be observed behavior that we've seen. How does that influence what we begin to propose and think about with the development opportunities? Who are the developers that really would be best suited in that particular case? And how does that lend into the conversations that we know and we expect we'll have externally with our communities?
Thank you very much.
Director Gonzalez.
Thank you. Just for the purposes of the board, I wanted to set the context of my personal position on how valuable and important this document is right now. From my perspective, we as a transit agency are one of the front lines of the TOD conversation locally. And frankly, what we're doing in this document, I think, really helps. I appreciate the context of the story of all the input. It was really good to hear how many folks you're talking to. From my perspective and from what I've seen in the TOD conversations, this is an opportunity to lean into the social benefit side of the equation very deliberately, and I think we're leapfrogging some of the policy conversations that have been had of late with affordability in the way this TOD program is approaching it. By putting an equal emphasis on displacement, I think really helps emphasize the impacts of development of any sort, whether it's TOD or otherwise, in looking at who lives there before we start and who lives there after we're done. And can the people that lived there before we started still opt into living in that neighborhood when we're all done? That's a very different tenor to the affordable housing conversation that we are having by and large today. And I applaud the agency for taking this approach and looking at the importance of a lot by lot emphasis, and really looking at the existing context as one of the driving elements to what's the right solution for the end result. So I'm proud to have been part of this process, and it has my full support. I think this is an exciting contribution to our regional conversation.
Yes.
I just might just to add here that I think to the point that Director Gonzalez is making is this is far larger than affordable housing. This is around, it gets to hitting several spokes on the wheel of how do we as an agency optimize the assets and the gifts the taxpayer has given us? How do we improve the livability in the region that is encompassing for all, welcoming for all lifestyles and types? For those who may be disadvantaged, to those who may in fact can live together with somebody who in fact has a lot of financial strength behind them too. So it also really, and I'm thinking of a couple examples I've been through personally myself, where I think of one site in particular. It was crime, prostitution, it was drugs. You couldn't get through the station quick enough, and then we developed. It was a $300 million deal. Half an hour on a train ride outside of the downtown central business district, and the crime went to almost zero, and the livability really increased. But it wasn't 3- and 4-story type of buildings. They were 20, 30-story buildings where people with their smart card came down off the glassed elevator, got onto a train, and went to work. And then they had a coffee, and then they went to the yoga studio, and then it's a chance to not just about residential units. It's around how do you put all the different elements of livability in as well. And it actually helps create new jobs that come with this. The new good incomes follow it. People's livelihood can improve. So I think this is an important strategy from my mind that helps management also in the prioritization, because often the developers of the day, and we've seen a couple where we don't just chase the deal of the day to transact the real estate. It's where we, with the strategy of what the kinds of uses are, will also help the private sector development community going, gee, if it's not on that list, I shouldn't waste a whole lot of design time. So it helps them be efficient where they spend their time as well. And it helps us be in sync with the municipalities in question and other ones going, does this make sense for what they want their regional town center to be or to become for the future? So I think it helps us take a regional lens, take a local lens as well as a way to blend this by doing the right thing site by site, but also allocate. We have limited resources here. So we're not being impulsive chasing the deal of the day around the region. It helps us prioritize which ones, if we accept this policy, then we move to the strategy development location by location, and it'll be market driven, but it'll be priority driven as well for us. So we can use our resources to have the highest chance of getting products to the drawing table and in place as quick as possible. So it's intended to accomplish two ends of the barbell here.
Comments, questions? Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate the staff and several other board members really digging into this further. I think my question is just around the future planning of these sites and location. And I mean, I'm already thinking ahead in terms of visualizing where these are going to be. So does our agency have an idea? Do we have a physical map of, for example, okay, here are some of the places in East Portland that we can focus on, or Clackamas County or Washington? Because I think that will help all of us, I think, in better understanding the impacted communities, since we are representatives of those regions, but also the connection, again, to affordable housing or social services, or what that development would create in essentially our backyards.
Yeah, we do have we have a good idea of what property we own that might be developable, and the obvious example are our underutilized park and rides that are out there, mostly on the east side. What we really want to do is take those properties and look at them through several lenses, one of them being a financial lens and what is feasible to develop today versus down the road. One of them is, like you said, an equity lens, an affordability lens, and try and, again, prioritize where we want to start. We haven't begun that. We've kind of begun that process. We haven't really dived into it yet. We have a position that we're trying to hire for a TOD commercial developer position that is going to be someone with expertise that can really help us on the financial aspects of that. So we're kind of waiting to get that position filled before we really dive into this process. But yes, we're going to start a prioritization process, pick the 2, 3, 4 most likely developable sites, and kind of move those through.
Yeah, I think the one thing this also does is, to your point, is for those like myself who are visual in nature, once we start laying this out on a map with public's input and our constituents' input, say, here's what we think it looks like, and here's what's the A group, the B group, the C group of prioritization. If you're a C, it better be one heck of a reason why. If not, this is where we want, with our limited resources, want to focus. As part of that focusing, I think this will also help us get to what we've not historically done here in TOD, is land assembly. So there may be properties that we have direct fee ownership of, fee simple, we own the property. We may want to parcel it with others. To actually, instead of building what this building looks like, it may be, do you do land assembly to create something actually community-wise, but also developer success-wise is actually far larger. So the land assembly piece, this policy helps us start to get into the strategy by site of what might be possible. I'll give you an example that is very complex, that's in this region today, that have already had requests for groups to meet knowing that we were doing this, and already on record at JPAC, is that I believe we need to go back and look at Gateway fundamentally. It's an amazing opportunity here that's 10 minutes to the airport, 15 minutes to downtown, highway intersections. It's beautiful. And so it is very complex because there's a lot of stakeholders in it. It's not what does TriMet own and that's what we're going to do. I think we have to use these as catalysts to help them be part of the community to re-envision what's possible. Are they complex? Nastily complex. But the prize could be really significant for all of us, including, we already tipped our hat to the private sector development, including TriMet putting for the first time its air rights on the table. We've not historically put rail air rights on the table, but you can build over top of rail lines. You can build, I give you examples where the trains come through a side of a building. So there may be ways through this that you can get to not only the piece of property, but the assembly piece in a broader conversation that is going to take a lot of Prosper Portland and Metro and all of us and each of the different constituents, City of Portland, all the partners, sometimes to give, to get. Because if we all stay in our square footage, we're going to be trapped, and we'll end up with I think, a far more siloed game. So this map will be a catalyst for all in prioritization, I think, for hopefully many years to come.
So your schedule in terms of taking it out to the local jurisdictions and getting feedback, and then when would you be coming back, you think, to us for some formal action?
Well, I think the plan was to try and get back to you in September. That may or may not be optimistic based on how quickly we can get meetings set up with our jurisdictional partners and brief them and take their input. So we want to do it fairly quickly.
Yeah.
I'd suggest, if not September, it'll be October's board meeting, is the intention.
All right, yeah.
Because following after that, we really want to get to the site-by-site strategy, which will be, I think, that's where the rubber starts to hit the road underneath policy.
One of the exciting things about, for me on this effort, is now as we can articulate our principles throughout the region, we're already hearing communities and neighborhoods and developers, as soon as Doug announced that we were leaning into this, I want to be part of that conversation. I want to be part of that discussion. And Doug and Shelley and Lance have been looking at other examples along the West Coast, as Lance mentioned. But in this document, this is much more aspirational of who we want to be as a community and how we want to perform as a region. And rather than people sort of being put off by that, they actually want to have that conversation. And we're, as Doug mentioned, in the Gateway District, as we're talking with folks at very much at the grassroots level, feet on the ground level, they're not shy about what we are proposing to do. They're saying, thank you, TriMet, for kind of bringing now this very direct conversation. We've been waiting for this for years, and we want to join, in that effort, both as community organizers, but also jurisdictional partners. There's a little bit of, kind of some little bit discomforting conversations because we're going to ask them to do things that they have not done previously. This is not about status quo. This is about understanding and really articulating what it could become and what are the barriers, as Lance mentioned and is in this document. What do we need to adjust? Parking ratios, height, density. So when we have that conversation, when we put Doug out there at the front of the line saying, here's some of the things that specifically we need to have at these locations, we're coming at it from a very strategic standpoint. And we also feel that we'll have folks kind of with us in that conversation, not beating us, but actually side by side with us, because they can see what that vision begins to look like. And that's where the sort of the passion, the excitement of what our investments have been intending to do, we can now be much more intentional about that and entrepreneurial.
Thank you for sharing that. I simply want to add that there is a place setting that this document is doing. It's really setting the table for the conversation that wants to be had, and it's declaring the intention to tinker with the way we've been accustomed to doing things. So I think it's a very powerful instrument to set the tone of robust conversations without saying what the answer is going to need to be. Right. And I really see a lot of power in the structure of the document. I want to acknowledge that there's also power in a TOD conversation that by its nature requires partnerships, public-private partnership conversations. There's a power to shining a light on the process by which we arrived at this document. I think the backstory of having the input of multiple agencies sounds like not just on the West Coast, and having regional and local agency input, the input of perhaps policyholders, and I'm not sure who else. I lost track of the list, but there's a value in capturing that in how we publicize this document, just so that it's there, it's kind of embedded in the communication, that this was not just two people sitting down over a table. This was a vetted conversation at a regional level with people that have been having this conversation, and we've put together something that's cherry picking essentially from the experiences at large and trying to lean into our own intentions moving forward. So we're contributing to that cherry tree in some of these items.
My only comment would be good work. I look forward to the outreach. And the only other thing I think about, tell me if I'm right or wrong here, when we think about transit-oriented development, we always think about light rail. But we've got a lot of frequent bus lines. We're going to have a division bus project.
Yep.
And my assumption is this also applies to development along many of those routes that we need to look at. And so I just want to verify that's the way staff and you see this, or am I off base?
Absolutely.
Okay.
This is about connecting livability to mobility, any and all that connects it.
Okay,
So
good.
Shouldn't be limited.
Thank you, President Warner. I realized there's something worth saying here, because I know that it was part of the conversations that led to the document we have in front of us today, and I can bet it's going to be something we're going to confront as board members and as staff as we get out to the community. So I want to be clear about one piece of what's not in this document that I think we'll probably get asked about, and it's in the form of not establishing a percent for affordability, or even a range of percentages. Because right now in the policy conversation of affordable housing, that really seems to be the focus area. And it was a deliberate thing, I think, to try to find a way to get ourselves out of the trap of being prescriptive to affordable housing percentages on developments. I bet we're gonna get asked by the community why we didn't set a number. So I wanted to take the time to acknowledge that there is, as structured, what this document allows us to do is have a conversation about the existing context. What is the profile of incomes and and demographics of the place where we're starting from, and making sure that at the end of the conversation, what we're really emphasizing here is a balance of uses, a compatibility of uses, even looking on peak and off peak, having multiple uses of similar facilities, and ensuring that at the end of the day, we're saying that housing, commercial, whatever the use is, we have to be cognizant of making sure we're contributing to the broader portfolio of the built environment, making sure we're providing for the most critical needs, where the biggest deficits are in any price point. So if we're developing in an area where there is predominantly lower wages and lower income folks, and the propensity for displacement is very high, we're probably going to end up with, based on this document, a scenario that really recognizes that we've got to have a high level of affordability emphasis in this particular area to avoid displacement. It might be that in some cases we'll have projects with really high percentages of affordable units. In some cases it might be a lower percentage because of the context. And I think it's not just the existing context on the site and around it, but the context of the region at large. If we have a huge deficit of penthouses and the vacancy rate is 0%, and we're proposing something in an area where there is a demand for those sorts of things, it's going to have a very different scenario than if we were at the opposite. Right now, we have a deficiency of low-income housing and affordable housing. So without having to put a number on it, what we're saying is, let's understand what that deficit is. I think we're all going to be smarter about having a conversation that doesn't start with the answer. So I wanted to emphasize that because I foresee we're going to get questions about this in the next year.
Correct. Good briefing. We look forward to hearing how your outreach goes, and be nice to hear from some of our local government partners when you come back.
Okay.
On this one.
Great.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for the input.
Good work. Mr. General Manager.
Second item
Yeah.
before you is going to call up, if I may, Carl Green and John Gardner, and to talk about the Title VI 2019 program update. And I'm just going to literally turn it over to them. I think you know both of them very well. So.
Good afternoon, board presidents, members of the board. Very excited to be here today to provide you an update and overview of our Title VI program update that we do every 3 years. This is my second rodeo, so it's exciting to see so much progress that we've achieved over the last 3 years. So first things first, I'm going to give a brief overview of what Carl will be walking you through this morning. And to my right is Carl Green Jr. He's TriMet's Title VI Program Administrator. So first, he's going to give you a brief Title VI refresher, followed by some information related to the requirements that TriMet's under related to FTA regulations, and then some information about how we did the triennial program update, which we're required to do every 3 years. And give a little bit of information about the demographics and how they've changed over the last 3 years. As well as put forward some proposed policy changes. So this is just an overview, and even though it's quite a few slides, it's not the 94-page program that we sent to you all last month with the 400 pages of exhibits and attachments. So a lot of work goes into managing this program, and just to give you a little context for what Carl's responsible for, he does all the service analysis for any line change you hear about or any property acquisition. He does all the compliance as well as the customer service complaint management. He does have help from Jonna and Jody, but he does the primary lifting of the responses. He does all the staff and partner training, which this year has been immense in terms of training our operators as part of the new hire orientation, the recertification process, as well as our partners in safety and security. He also facilitates our in-house cross-divisional Title VI program team, which includes 3 of the agency's executive directors to ensure that we're actually implementing this stuff across the whole organization. I got to say that 2 years ago when we lost our Title VI program manager who moved on to a new opportunity, I was nervous about keeping the momentum of one of the really good Title VI programs across the country. So I'm excited to say today that not only have we kept the momentum, but we've grown our program, and we're one of the best. So if nothing else today, please understand that you oversee and Doug manages one of the best Title VI programs in the country, and that is primarily due to the work of Carl Green to my right. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carl.
A little bashful. Thank you, John, for that introduction as far as what I am able to deliver upon Board President, fellow directors, I'd like to say again, thank you for taking the opportunity to to listen to this briefing. I'm very excited to deliver it. As you see to your right, one thing that I would be remiss if I didn't state that this year marks the 55th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 being signed by President Johnson on July 2nd. So this bill was the most sweeping civil rights legislation passed by Congress ever since the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. Embedded within this bill was 11 different titles, which elevated the enforcement, accountability for anti-discrimination in employment, schools, and outlawed segregation in public places such as buses, swimming pools, and so forth. Relevant to today's conversation is Title VI, which prohibits discrimination in federally assisted programs such as TriMet. So I could go on and on about the civil rights because I'm so passionate about it, but as John mentioned, this is something, it's meant to be brief, and y'all have heard countless times of what comprises of Title VI, so I'll go ahead and proceed with the remainder of the presentation. So as far as Title VI and transit equity goals, this list before you is not meant to be exhaustive, but a way to highlight some of TriMet's commitment to transit equity in Title VI. Two bullet points that I'd like to highlight is the first one, it's about providing equal access, fairness, and equal protection under the law. The second item that I'd like to highlight is it's ensuring that people of color and low-income riders are not unfairly affected by agency-level policy and actions. I think the previous presentation highlights a great example of transit equity in Title VI being embedded within a policy that we're looking at adopting. I look forward to working with the transit-oriented development FTE or staff member as we look to carry out the strategy of TOD. The slide is not necessarily here, but I'd like to highlight some other work that I've been able to deliver upon. And a good way of thinking about transit equity, it's about the what. And Title VI is the how. So a good transition about the practical application as far as Title VI goes and being able to administer this program is I would like to say hats off first to all the executive directors, to Doug, and so forth for providing the opportunity of that great support link in order to carry out Title VI and what we were charged with doing. So as John mentioned, I provide equity analyses ranging from the annual service plan, so working with Bernie Bottomley and his staff, to doing a facility equity analysis, which was carried out with Steve Witter and his staff. And I could go on, and one item that I'd like to mention is the service performance monitoring report. It's noted on page 43 of the 2019 Title VI program, but that provides an opportunity to ensure that we are providing equal distribution of revenue hours in service to low-income and minority population, and so forth. Another item that I'd like to highlight is as John mentioned, our Civil Rights Complaint Management Program. But before I start, I do want to say that I inherited a great program, the 2016 program update, which by your approval several years ago on this day or during this board meeting, each of you, or most of you that are sitting before me, had a steady hand in ensuring that we were able to adopt such a sound program. And as we look at 2019 and which will require board action, John mentioned we were probably top 10 in the nation of comparable transit agencies. But I'd like to say, as we looked at the 2019, I wanted to make some fine tuning of the policies. We wanted to update our language access plan, our complaints management program, and I can say just from working with my affinity group, which comprised of over 22 different agencies in the Pacific Northwest, Idaho, and Alaska, is that we are, and it's a little bit of notoriety, but we have the top 5 programs in the country. So I'm very proud and very confident to say that to each of you. So as far as the Federal Transit Administration, they put forth a circular which provides the policy and a framework of how transit agencies are to comply, and it also provides as a mechanism to monitor our compliance with Title VI regulation. So as Jean mentioned, it's a requirement that every 3 years that the governing entity, which is the TriMet Board of Directors, approve of any policy changes, and which I'll cover down on here in a couple slides. So as mentioned in the email in Doug's weekly report that came out on, I believe it was sent to you July 18th, there's a couple of different policy ranging from the major service change and our disparate impact and disproportionate burden. So the next action, which we'll put forth a resolution before you next month, is to approve of our 2019 Title VI program. So the program update process thus far. So I will say that there was a lot of hard work going into this program update, but it afforded the opportunity to work with internal partners. As I mentioned, I am very grateful for the support of all the executive director team and also my boss, John Gardner, for having the confidence in me to be able to manage this program. So it's one that I'm very passionate about. So as far as our triennial update process thus far, as you can see to the screen to your right, there was a lot of groundwork, but it was a full court press of engaging with internal stakeholders to more or less assess the policies that we've implemented in 2016. And the feedback that I received was very great and inspiring to know that what we put forth in 2016 and the policies that y'all adopted were very sound and meeting the intent and the spirit of Title VI. So as always, we engaged with the Transit Equity Advisory Committee, the Title VI Committee, which is made up of several executive directors and key agency staff. We also took the liberty of creating an affinity group or a consortium of like and comparable agencies to receive feedback on their policies in order to refine and make sure that we have the highest level of standard with regards to our Title VI policies. And the last item that I wanted to mention regarding this is our level of community engagement has been the highest and the most robust since years past, ranging from our language access plan, where our multicultural programs manager, Martine Gonzalez, was leading the charge with regards to engaging with various community partners and faith-based organizations. And you can see in the bottom sub-bullet the different various organizations that we partnered with. So again, the TriMet or transit agencies are required to collect demographic information. So what we were able to leverage was the onboard fare survey, where we received over 23,000 responses. We also conducted a Title VI program update, which we received over 400 responses, and that was in partnership with our Access Transit program manager, Wes Charlie, who sent out the word, got the word out to receive that many responses. And then lastly, as I mentioned, a major milestone for this year is our language access plan, where we engaged over 1,500 limited English proficiency populations from various language groups, and we received over 900 responses, all of which led to the development of the draft 2019 program update. So this is a little bit about what we heard, and I'll go over this a little bit quickly. 2 items that I'd like to highlight is the way in which we approached our survey distribution was more or less to raise the level of awareness of our riders of the Title VI program. So the survey carried out that function to a T, and some of the responses that we received is that our current policies do reflect TriMet's commitment to civil rights. And just being in this position for these past 2 years, it's been remarkable to be able to manage this program. And another item that I wanted to mention was the low-income fare program. Obviously, I believe at this point right now we have 18,000 or more. I'm getting the thumbs up by Director Gonzalez, But it's an immense benefit for our region, so I'm very glad to be part of a department that gets to manage this program. Again, now I'll cover down on our language access plan survey and what we heard. So while TriMet has been successful in connecting with and serving people from various language groups, there's still work to be done. And that's more or less what we heard from this level of engagement that we had with limited English proficiency populations. Another note is that various LEP populations access information in various ways, so our approach, strategy, and delivery of communication should be adapted based on those needs and the way in which they receive that information. And as the last bullet mentions, it's about raising the level of communication and our awareness of our various programs, especially when they're at their infant stage.
And I just want to offer that those 900 responses we received were coming back in the language of those communities. So those 900 LEP responses, which is a very high result return rate, which we got in partnership with a lot of community-based organizations.
Thank you, John. All right, so the FTA also requires that we update the board on updated demographics, and you can barely see it on the screen here, but I wanted to mention that there are two sources of truth or references that we utilize in order to update our demographics. One is the American Community Survey or census data. Currently, with the 2013-2017 ACS, the district average for minority or people of color population is 30%, and this has increased since the last ACS, which was about 28% or 27.6. And then if you look to the right, the service district average for low-income population is 20%. Next, I wanted to highlight the onboard fare survey. As you can see in the second column, this is a breakdown of our race, ethnicity that we receive regarding percentage of trips made by minority riders. It's a total of 36%. So if you recall, I mentioned 30% for the U.S. Census data. So this basically communicates or illustrates that our ridership is more diverse than our service district average. And the other columns, it highlights what the breakdown of, or the composition of our ridership was in 2016 and 2012.
Interesting.
The next slide here is a pie chart of, a pie chart of our low-income population, and similar to our minority population, it's 36%, which again is a lot higher than our service district average noted in the census data. And this slide here, it's best to interpret this slide as not comparing minority versus non-minority or low income versus higher income regarding vehicle modes used. It's basically giving a breakdown within each group, the distribution or percentage of minority riders utilizing our MAX or our bus. And as you can see, between minority and non-minority, again, there's no comparison here, but it's pretty comparable of the usage of both MAX and bus. And the two bar charts to the right gives the breakdown of low income and higher income, which is defined as above the 150% federal poverty level. All right, so now let's get into the proposed Title VI policy updates. Again, as I mentioned, I will be going over the major service change policy, disparate impact, and disproportionate policy proposals. The first one is our current policy, the first 4 bullets, as you can see there. And what we're proposing is to add removing or retiring a route from service. And the reason for this change is to clarify whether a line level analysis is performed. The second policy that we're looking at, and I will say that they are disparate impact for minority and disproportionate burden for low income. And what we're adding or proposing to add is a change to our fare change policy, or disparate impact and disproportionate burden policy regarding fare changes, rather. And I'll let you take a moment to read the current policy that you have. And what we're proposing to the existing policy is, you can see here in the red text, is that TriMet will work to minimize any potential impacts on minority populations for all fare changes. And the measure of disparate impact involves a comparison of impacts borne by minority riders or populations compared to impacts borne by non-minority populations. And when minority populations or riders will experience a 10% or more greater adverse effect than that borne by non-minority riders populations, such changes will be considered to have a disparate impact. So the reason why we're making this proposal for this policy update is to, one, it's an FTA or Federal Transit Administration requirement that we set a threshold. And as we went through the process of coming up with this threshold, I can tell you that it was vetted very diligently, in the sense that our Transit Equity Advisory Committee was an active partner to dial in what would be the best threshold. The Title VI Committee, in addition to that, I worked with the Region 10 Title VI Working Group, which is the affinity group that I mentioned earlier, landing on which would be the best policy or threshold for TriMet. It ranged anywhere from 7% to 35%. So given that data, recognizing that data has a margin of error, we landed on the 10% threshold as the most significant and sensitive for TriMet. Yes?
Implied in that is that minority riders have a financial, are low income. And yet your chart that you gave that showed the district's minority population versus the district's low-income population indicates that some minority populations are not low income, but yet you would be providing a adjustment in the fare for all minority populations regardless of their income ability. Am I understanding that correctly?
So I think the way to recognize is, so we do the analysis for the two different groups, the low income and the minority. We already know that any change to low income populations is going to have some effects. So the real question is kind of what you're saying, the opposite side is, what is the effect to minority populations? And
that
so
may not be low income.
Right, but that's what the analysis would show.
Okay.
And all we're really saying is that at a 10% change in the cost of fare, we are automatically going to do an analysis. As opposed to a 2% change in the fare. We wouldn't assume that it's going to be a disparate impact, but we would at 10%. So then we would start looking at mitigating the effects of a fare change.
But it would apply to all minority.
And all riders, essentially, but all minority and all low income. But the analysis is focused on the minority ridership.
Okay.
So, if I could follow up on that. So, along with that question, I mean, regardless of the income of the minority, I mean, essentially these statutes and rules are that if it impacts a minority, regardless of income, that's that trigger. Regardless of income, if it impacts a minority population, then it's going to trigger some type of additional review before we move forward.
Yes, that is correct. And I would also add that we are required to conduct a fare equity analysis for all fare changes, but having that 10% threshold serves as a baseline whether or not, or if it's at or above that, where it would be considered an adverse impact. And coupled with that, I know it's very data-centric, we also would have a community engagement process where we're working with community partners and our riders to determine the level of impact, similar to what we did for the e-fare migration, where we had a comprehensive level of engagement with TIAC and our partners.
And when you say 10%, it's not a 10% change in the fare, it's a 10% disparate impact on on the different populations.
Yes.
Okay.
Comparing the minority population for, let's say, for example, if they're using the day pass compared to, wait, that's a bad example. Yes, to answer your question.
The low and compare.
Less is more, right.
Okay.
Yes, Director Edwards.
Your current policy says 95% confidence level. What does that actually mean?
So that's just considering the margin of error. So you would perform a Z test. I know it's a little bit more technical, but it ensures the highest level of statistical significance. So it reduces the opportunity for chance, that the results is due to chance. So that's pretty high in the social sciences, 95%.
So it just allows for a margin of error?
Yes, sir.
It's a statistical standard that sets how much population you need to analyze in order to say I've got enough information to make the aggregate declaration.
And in the proposed language, why the 10% threshold?
As I mentioned before, Director Edwards, regarding the robust vetting process, working with our community partners, Trans Equity Advisory Committee, the Region 10 Consortium Group, which is made up of over 20 different organizations, researching various policies of comparable and like agencies, where we landed on, as far as the Title VI Committee, after conducting all this research and engagement, 10% served, it positions us to have the most sensitive for our district.
Okay, thank you.
Question. So I just have two comments. One is that 2020 we have a new census that is taking place, and so with the updated demographics, knowing that we will have more updated demographics after the 2020 census, how do you? Is TriMet a part of those conversations that are happening right now in terms of our involvement around coordinating with the Oregon Census Program? Because I think it would be advantageous for us to maybe pursue what that would look like to get a better snapshot of riders. So that's my first question and comment. And then the second is just a piece around age. I know that race, ethnicity, obviously important to this, as well as the breakdown of those groups, which is important. But I'm also thinking that if 30% of those that are in the demographic are people of color or minority, then a good percentage of that is probably children under 5 or those under 18 who may not regularly use our transit system because they are, they're younger. So just wondering if you have an age breakdown so that, again, we can better understand the needs of, the 65 plus, right, minority group, that's opposed to folks who are working age. Do we have that information?
To answer your first question regarding the update to the 2020 census, yes, we are actively involved. One of our staff, Maria, attends the meetings. I believe it's with the East County Caring Community. Yes, thank you, John. And so we are actively in that conversation. And second, regarding age, one item that I would like to highlight is our Transit Equity Index. So embedded within that, utilizing census data, we're able to ascertain the age groups for various populations. And two, with our onboard fare survey, it also asks the question for age demographics, so we're able to parcel out and take a closer look if that's what you're looking for as well.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful maybe in the next presentation, just to include that sort of age breakdown as well.
And Carl didn't say this, but we're using the most recent data available, not just the census.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we're hoping to do maybe in the next few months is give you all sort of board district profiles, so you know who and what the ridership looks like in your district, but also the demographics as well.
Okay.
Dr. Edwards?
I guess, numbers are challenging. I get that. But I guess we had a comment and a question earlier that we talked about that there are some minorities that don't fall into the low-income bracket. Conversely, there may be non-minorities that do fall into the low-income bracket. Are those significant numbers, or do they skew you, or do they put you outside of Title VI?
As far as those two populations, we look at them independently. So the disparate impact recognizes minority or people of color populations, whereas the disproportionate burden policies looks at or below 150% of the federal poverty level, which again, to your point, Director Edwards, is sometimes it is baked in where you'll have non-minority in the low-income population.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so looking at our next slide, so again, as I mentioned, our 2019 program update included a survey where we received over 400 responses. One item that we are proposing to add pertains to assessment of access or connections to jobs, healthcare, schools, and grocery stores. I believe that was passed by the board in 2016. So the proposed policy update is to expand assessment to include parks, recreation, and green spaces. And this is given it was a common theme in the survey responses. So we've already took action to reach out to our GIS department by NAICS codes industry codes to be able to collect that information. So as we move forward with our 2021 service equity analysis, that could be part of the composition for access considerations. That is if the board approves in September. So looking at next steps, it's reviewing comments received on the draft Title VI program update. We launched a survey a couple months ago. We wanted to get to receive more feedback. We launched a 2019 Title VI program update website, which we launched to our community partners, and we had asked our TIAC to distribute to their contacts as well. So we will receive that feedback between July and September. Again, board action, September, the next board meeting, and then we are looking to submit to the Federal Transit Administration by October 1st, 2019. Any further questions?
So Title VI, it gets to the income versus the minority, low income versus minority status. Does Title VI mainly focus on low income minority, or does it look at non-minority low income as well?
Again, as I mentioned, two separate groups. So Title VI, the protected categories is race, color, and national origin. So as we're looking at the census data or a fair survey, we are looking at people of color and folks that are minority populations. But in addition to that, the FTA recognizes low-income populations as a community of concern. So within that is minority and non-minority within the low-income population.
So in terms of your proposed policy change language, where in the first paragraph you say TriMet will work to minimize any potential impact on minority populations for all fare changes.
Yes.
I suggest you insert minority populations and minority and low-income populations.
Yes, one item that I failed to highlight was at the very bottom of this slide is the exact same policy for low-income population, which is the disproportionate burden policy.
Oh, so you have two
mirrors.
policies?
Yes.
You can't
Director
have
Simmons.
one policy that addresses both?
So yes, two separate policies.
But you can't combine them. Does Title VI require that you have two separate policies?
Yes, in order to when I conduct my analysis, we're looking at whether an adverse impact will be on minority or low-income population.
Okay, okay,
Sounds like a cleaner break.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think PGE shut down the air. Oh, I'm sorry.
That
Please.
PGE did shut down our
The
air conditioning.
Oh. Is
So
that-
I didn't hear.
Need a little warm. Go
You
ahead.
don't have to go home, but you can't stay here? Is that what
I
just
think that's
happened?
probably what they're saying.
Yeah.
So, thanks, noted. So from what I understand, then you'll be returning to us in this is a preview. September is when we would be making a vote or a decision on regards to the policy updates.
Yes, we'll be bringing forward a resolution, Director.
Then this seems like a good time to mention, in my assumption, there's, let's see, slide 20 of 21, the proposed policy update that says to expand, it's the next one, to expand the assessment to include parks, recreation, and green spaces, and that came from community involvement. is it fair to interpret recreation as including access to arts and cultural experiences?
Yes.
Okay, good. For the record, then, I think that it's important to note, because as we lean into the livability piece, that's an important element, and I applaud you for incorporating this and bringing this proposed update to us, because it really helps us look, I think, beyond the compliance approach is what this policy update is doing. This is extending us a little bit outside of the required compliance. It's not about putting us back in line with compliance, but it's about leaning into the intentions of that policy and trying to apply it with a livability focused value. Is that what's happening?
Yes.
I applaud you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you both. Appreciate it. Yeah,
Thank
look
you.
forward to seeing you in September.
Yes.
I think we're done, Mr. General Manager.
I think we'll declare victory.
All right, thank you.
Done. Thank you.
And we'll go outside where it's a bit cooler now?
Yes.